everybody, this is Captain Fred, your host for Aviation Theater, and a proud member of the San Diego Aerospace Museum, the first place to visit when you come to San Diego. We have a good program for you today, and we'll get started right after this important message. Welcome once again to Captain Fred's Aviation Theater. Today we're visiting with John Hammerstrand, and we'll be talking about the Cessna Skymaster. Now, John, the Cessna Skymaster is a twin-engine airplane, right?
That is correct, Fred.
But it's not a traditional twin-engine airplane that has an engine on the left wing and an engine on the right wing side by side like most twins.
We have an engine in the front of the aircraft, and we have an engine in the rear of the aircraft.
Now, what is the reason of putting an engine in front and back instead of side by side like other twins?
So that you don't have asymmetrical thrust. When you lose an engine in a traditional type aircraft, you may have a throw over to the left or over to the right, and you may go into a right turn or a left turn.
With the engines side by side, if you lose one, it causes the engine to roll.
It causes the aircraft to either roll or left, depending on which engine is out of service.
And from the FAA films that I've seen, on takeoff, if you lose an engine, you don't have time to recover from that, and it's deadly.
If you have at or above your critical speed, VMC plus, you may be able to climb and return back to the airport.
But losing an engine on takeoff with a traditional, conventional twin is a very dangerous thing.
It is when you're below the maximum VMC speed. That is correct.
And what would happen if you lost an engine on this airplane on climb out or on takeoff?
Well, assuming that you are above your speed, your liftoff speed, which is 75 knots, then you would climb at 85 knots, and you go through a procedure to shut down the engine, whether it be in the front or the rear, and you would continue your climb.
But you wouldn't roll.
With no asymmetrical thrust differences.
Mm-hmm. Okay, let's talk about the takeoff. What is the takeoff roll for this airplane?
This aircraft will take off and become airborne in approximately 540 feet.
540 feet. And what is your climb-out speed?
My climb-out speed, I would rotate at 65 knots, climb 75, 85 knots.
And your rate of climb?
My rate of climb would be established at 1,300 feet a minute.
1,300 feet a minute?
1,300 feet a minute, with both engines operating.
That's almost straight up. Boy, that's really climbing.
It is a performing aircraft.
Okay. Now, you've got the front engine is a puller or screw propeller, and the back engine is a pusher?
That is correct.
Okay, tell our viewers about a puller and a pusher.
The front engine pulls, and the engine is clockwise, looking from the cockpit. And
okay, looking straight out, the propeller turns in a clockwise motion.
That is correct. In the rear engine, it turns in a counterclockwise motion.
The opposite way.
So the differences outweigh themselves, so that when you lose one engine, you can continue to go straight ahead.
Well, with the two propellers turning in different directions, they counteract the torque on each other, so there is no torque.
That is correct. With both engines operating, you can climb straight out with ease.
Mm-hmm. Now, if you were cruising along, what is your cruise speed?
Well, at cruise at 10,000 feet, The true airspeed is 180 knots.
Okay, let's say you're cruising along on your way to Las Vegas, and you lose the front engine. The engine stops, the propeller stops turning, and are you flying along with that propeller there in front of you not moving?
Well, should you feather the front engine because of some malfunction, whether a mag went off the line or some type of happening, you could feather the engine, going through the engine shutdown procedures, and feather the engine. And by the way, if you shut down the front engine en route, you'll just be 1 hour late.
But you'll actually be flying along with the front propeller standing still, not moving.
Correct. It would be feathered, and it would be feathered into the wind so that you would not create drag on that propeller that's stationary.
If I was flying and you came by and your propeller wasn't moving, it would get my attention real fast.
Correct. However, we have a rear engine that's performing for us to get us to our destination.
But the rear propeller, when a propeller is turning, you can't see it. It turns so fast. So most people, if you're flying along using only your rear engine and the front propeller is standing still, you would cause a lot of people a traumatic experience.
Especially if you had passengers and the passengers weren't aware. So you tend to brief your passengers prior to flight.
But still, it's a weird experience, I'm sure, to look out there and see that propeller standing still up in the air.
Well, it gets everybody's attention, including the pilot's attention.
Mm-hmm. Now, let's say that you were flying along and you lost the rear engine. Tell us what you would do.
Assuming that the front engine is still operating,
yes,
what you would do is feather the rear engine, and because that one engine would be out, if you're going to your destination, we would assume that we're still, again, going to be 1 hour late.
Mm-hmm. So it's really no big deal if you lose an engine other than you fly at a slower speed.
Correct. The airspeed would be approximately 95 to 100 knots en route.
Mm-hmm. The rear engine, I guess, wouldn't be as impressive because you wouldn't see that the rear propeller wasn't turning. Whereas the front engine, that propeller standing right there in front of you, right in front of the windshield.
Correct. What you would do is look at your gauges, your instruments, your fuel flow, your RPM, and your manifold, and you're trained to recognize when an engine quits en route or on the line. When the engine is on the line and it quits, you are trained to recognize a engine out.
Tell me again the cruise speed.
The cruise speed, top speed is 180 knots.
180 is top speed.
Correct.
What's the cruise speed?
The cruise speed's approximately 165, 175 knots.
Okay, and what would it stall at?
The aircraft, this aircraft here stalls at approximately, I would say, 51, 52 knots.
Well, that's a pretty big difference between 180 and 51. I thought you were going to say it stalled at 90 or something like that.
No, these aircraft are pretty reliable. They're built by Cessna Aircraft Corporation, and the slow speed end is taken into consideration. This aircraft has a stall-equipped aerodynamic stall system on it.
That's STOL. Tell our viewers what that means.
That means short takeoff and landing.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a modification to the aircraft from its basic original aircraft.
And it's on the wingtips, the modification is
it's on the wingtips out in front here. This is sort of rounded out to create high lift, and on the tail surfaces.
Now, you said Cessna is a good name in aviation. It's been around since 1911. Clyde Cessna built Silver Wings, his first airplane, which looked exactly like a Blériot in 1911. So Cessna has been a name in aviation since 1911.
Correct, and Cessna aircraft are very reliable products, whether it be a Cessna Skymaster or a Cessna 310 or any other type of Cessna. They're very reliable aircraft, and I enjoy flying this aircraft.
I would imagine that the majority of student pilots are learning to fly in a Cessna 152 today.
Correct, and that gives them a basic understanding of the product aircraft and the series of aircraft that they may be flying in the future.
There's a Stearman taking off in the background. That noise you hear is the radial engine from a World War II Stearman taking off in the background. I was going to ask you about the horsepower again. What is the horsepower?
The horsepower is it's from a Continental 210 horsepower, rated at 2,800 RPM at 28 inches of manifold pressure. And the aircraft is consuming 18 gallons on the takeoff roll.
Okay, that brings up a question. It has a Continental engine. Originally, the Cessna 150, which thousands of people trained in, had a Continental engine. But about 10 years ago, the Cessna 152 came out, and Cessna went to a Lycoming. So Cessnas have Lycoming engines now. So this airplane has to be more than 10 years old to have a Continental engine. What year is it?
This aircraft is 1966 model.
And that's why it has a Continental engine, because at that time Cessna was using Continental.
Correct. And the Continental engine, according to my standards, are very reliable engines. This engine was overhauled in 1974, and we've had this engine in the airplane since 1974 up to 2000. And we have 1,560 hours on these two engines, and they're still purring just as if they were new.
We'll continue talking about the Cessna Skymaster right after we come back from this very important message. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Captain Fred's Aviation Theater. We have now with us Bob Worvey, who is the co-owner of the airplane. And Bob, you're going to tell us about the history and the restoration of this particular airplane.
Well, my partner John got started in aviation early. He was 19 when he started flying. Fred, I didn't start until I was 51, about 4 years ago.
That doesn't make any difference.
I know it doesn't, but in the process of doing some ground school at John's house, I walked out in the backyard and I said, "John, what's that?" He said, "That's an airplane," because he had decommissioned this thing about 10, 12 years ago. And at that time, I'd only been flying for maybe a year or something like that. And I was intrigued, and I started studying it, and I ordered some information on it. And the more I looked at it, I had a chance to ride in one, the more I liked it. And I said, I'd like to have one. And
this airplane was sitting in John's backyard?
In pieces. Mm-hmm. And I'll show you my scrapbook to prove it. Anyway, I said, we looked at possibly getting one, but they're a pretty expensive airplane.
Oh, yes.
And all I could find out there was junk for a lot of money. And I said, well, you already got that in your backyard.
You got junk for no money in your backyard.
Well, let's throw some money at it and see what happens. And we talked about it for months and months and months. And finally, we decided to do it. It took us 1 year and 8 months to restore the airplane. I think it took John close to a month to do all the paperwork, complete it all because of all the ADs, and that's administrative directives from the FAA.
Modifications.
Yes, we had to comply with to bring it up to currency and everything like that. And we actually took our first flight on the July 2nd, 1999. And just completed our first annual on it about a month and a half back, and we've put close to 275 hours on the airplane.
Now, when you're building an airplane, the FAA has to come and inspect it 3 times while you're building it. If you're restoring an airplane, does the FAA come and inspect anything?
That's a good question, Fred, and I don't know the answer, but John is an inspector.
The noise that you hear is the banner tow plane. He's picking up a banner, another Stearman. He's picking up a banner on the other side of the airport. So you said that John is IA?
He's an IA and an A&P, and it's because of his experience and his knowledge at aircraft repair that I was, motivated to do this with him.
Well, if he's an IA, he can inspect it himself. He doesn't have to have the FAA come and do that.
That is absolutely correct. And I have to tell you, because of his background, and my background was engineering with business background, but I've been in finance for many years, we were very, very careful and make sure that we did it not just okay, it had to be 100% correct, because I said, this is a plane that you and I are going to be riding in.
And you can't pull off to the side of the road if you have a problem.
That's right.
Tell me what you like about this airplane.
Well, it's the very thing that you and John talked about earlier. My first experience in getting my multi-engine license was at Shebley Aviation in Bullhead, Laughlin. And on the takeoff roll, the instructor shut off one engine. And
deliberately?
Deliberately. And it caught me by surprise so much that I almost went off the runway. But he said, now you understand what asymmetric thrust means.
Yeah.
And that was even confirmed in my mind more. We had already started this project, that I was on the right track with getting something with centerline thrust. This airplane, you can shut off one engine and it'll keep going in the same direction. It'll go slower, and performance is not good on one engine, but it'll get you to an airport. It'll get you back to home again, even with the airplane with fuel and people in it. So safety was my big reason for wanting a centerline thrust aircraft. They made, according to the information I've seen, a total of about 3,000 of these planes, including the Air Force's O2.
In what time period was this plane manufactured?
They started in '64 with the 336, which was the fixed gear. And in 1965, they brought out the first folding landing gear. And 66, the 337A Super Skymaster, which this is. And they made them all the way through about 1980.
Now, this airplane was used in Vietnam and by Air America.
Correct, correct. As a matter of fact, if any of your viewers have seen Bat-21 with Gene Hackman and Danny Glover, that is the Air Force's version is an O2 337 Skymaster. Really, it's the same airplane, except they put, you know, missile launchers and machine guns on it. I've talked to a number of people who flew them in Vietnam, and they said they were a great airplane.
It was used for clandestine activities.
Well, in the movie Bat-21, they used it as a forward observation and for spotting a downed pilot, or downed Air Force officer in that case. But for spotting, for propaganda purposes, you probably saw where some people were using them for propaganda to draw leaflets over Havana, Cuba. And Fidel Castro sent his Air Force up and shot 2 of them down. This was about,
is that right?
About 3 or 4 years ago, I think, if my memory serves me correctly. You can look on the internet and see. But they were using them to spot for boat people. But they decided, and the State Department had told them not to do that. And one of the reasons that I remember this so well is when we were first looking for an airplane, I found one in Florida and looking to buy it, and I said, why is the guy selling it? He said, well, he lost his license. He said, the State Department took it away. And I said, you're kidding. He said, he was the pilot that survived the attack. And so since he wasn't going to be flying anymore, he had his airplane for sale. We thought about looking at it, but decided that we'd just put this one together instead.
You didn't ask how many bullet holes were...
No, I didn't. It probably had some.
Well, apparently then it's a tough bird.
Yes, it is.
And it can be used for military activities when needed.
Yes.
Okay. Quickly, in closing, what else would you like to tell our viewers?
This plane has tremendous lifting capabilities. You can put full fuel and put people in it, so it'll carry up to 6 people, and it will still perform very well. That was another attraction, and it's big enough for John, who's 6'4", and myself 6'2", to get in it and still have room. That's
so you
what
don't
I like.
have to worry if you've got an extra suitcase or something.
That's correct. That's correct. It fit what I wanted in an airplane, and that was something that was roomy and reliable.
Very good. Thank you for visiting with us today.
My pleasure, Fred.
We'll continue in just a moment. Welcome back to Captain Fred's Aviation Theater. I feel like I'm in between 2 bookends here, John and Bob. Now, you guys had some information you wanted to share with our viewers. Is it Abbott and Costello or Laurel and Hardy?
Laurel and Hardy, yeah.
Laurel and Hardy. You're
Right,
on.
Jeff. Right, well, Bob asked me if the front engine quit and you feathered it, you are concerned. And Bob asked me, he said, well, what's going to happen? And I said, we're only going to be 1 hour late.
And I said to John, following that line of reasoning, that if the second engine quits, we'll only be 2 hours late.
On that basis, we would be a 95-knot glider, and we would be in serious situation. But we could glide, hopefully, to a safe landing. But we hope with the two engines that we're able to make our destination.
You know, John, another thing that's quite attractive about this airplane is that it has a glide ratio of 13:1, which basically means that if you're up 1 mile, which is, you know, 5,200, what is it, 84 feet, something like that, you'd basically be able to go 13 miles. So if you're flying at 10,500, you're going to be able to go roughly 25 miles, and most people are within 25 miles of a suitable
someplace to land.
Someplace to land. Most of the time it's an airport. And so that was another thing about this. The short takeoff and landing capabilities of this airplane means that when we go into a field that's short, we can get up and over the trees instead of looking at them as we're taking off from underneath.
Since this is STOL, what do you need to land? Could you land on a football field?
I'm not sure I could do it, but John probably could.
Yes, the aircraft is capable of landing less than 300 feet, and that's remarkable about this airplane. The reliability of these two engines are that it would be very remote that we would ever have a dual engine failure.
That has happened, but it's because the pilot forgot to observe the fuel consumption in the airplane. As a matter of fact, that was in reviewing the reports on this airplane before we decided to go this way. I looked at what caused them to crash, and most of the time it was pilot error running them out of fuel or mismanaging fuel.
And that is the unforgivable sin.
Correct.
Thank you, Stan. Thank you, Ollie. Thank you for being with Aviation Theater. This is Captain Fred saying, I love airplanes and I honor the people who fly them. And today it has been the Cessna Skymaster.